We are sisters standing side by side, side by side. We are listening to nothing. We are fathers watching us with pride, us with pride. Through Cerridwen we are kings, let the magic spread far and wide. Hold us aglow, let it show all the wonder in the dark bright light, dark bright light. Hello and welcome to my podcast, or our podcast really. My name is B. Halligan. I am a priestess of Cerridwen and a priestess of Avalon, and I live in Avalon, Glastonbury. Have done for the last 12 years, and my family slowly but surely joined me as we came into the magic of Avalon. And the reason I'm speaking to you today is because for the last 8 years, we, the priestesses and priests of Cerridwen, have created the Witches' Memorial Walk. Initially, the idea was to bring something back from the past, something painful, something traumatic, something that many people report is still in their life today. If we believe in past lives, if we believe that past lives have an impact on our present life, and I believe that very firmly, and in my healing practice I come across that on a regular basis, if we believe that, then we know that at one point many of us have been accused of being a witch. We call ourselves the returning priestesses, the returning healers, especially soul healers. And witches is just another word for healer. It's just another word of magic keeper, of someone who can work their intent and will in conjunction with the powers of nature. Right now here in Avalon, everybody's gearing up for Cerridwen. It's one of our biggest festivals here, and pagans from all over the world come to visit us, to celebrate with us, to commiserate with us. We here are under the purview of the Bishop of Bath and Wells, very famously commemorated in Blackadder, who was truly an abominable human being. And there were several of them, and it seemed like their debauchery and their anger and their rage and their horrible behavior was the same for all of them. There used to be a lot of court cases here in the UK. We didn't burn people, we hanged them. And it was really interesting that in a recent initiation into her priestesshood again, one of our Mexican sisters went back into a past life during embodiment in which she had been a priestess or a healer in that time when they hanged them. And just where the knot of the noose would have been, she got a really sharp pain, and for quite a few hours she was in a lot of pain. Obviously we gave her healing, we dissolved the trauma that was sitting in the body, but the traumatic life, the traumatic ending to her life really needed to be deeply and more deeply healed. The thing is that these lives will come up no matter what you do. Something in your normal everyday life can trigger a memory, can trigger a flash. Sometimes you see your past life like a movie behind your eyes, and it can be quite frightening, quite threatening. So the memorial walk was created, first of all, because all of the records that were there from the tribunal, and we still have the tribunal in Glastonbury here. It's not a very pleasant place, although it is now a tourist place. It's not a very pleasant place at all. I've set foot in it twice and it made me feel really sick. And right at the back is a beautiful garden, and in the garden there's a well, and the well was once much, much bigger than it is now, and we know that people were ducked there. We know that, we can feel that, and some of us can remember that. So I don't like going in there. But all the court records were in there. And then mysteriously, in the last century, there was a fire, and suddenly all the records were burned. There is very little evidence of what was done there. But for those of us who can see in the back into the past, we know the horrific injuries, the horrific hurts, the horrific accusations that were made against men and women. And most of them were made out of malice by their own people. And this is something that is still very present in our life. This whole cancel culture thing, this whole, silencing people from giving their authentic opinion. Yes, some of the opinions may not be what we would like to hear, but it's not our job to police what other people think, what other people feel, and sometimes what other people say. If we start policing that, then we may be in real trouble, because once you start it, it's very hard to stop. So these witches that we are commemorating are witches from the local area. We have names, we have a whole list of people who were accused, who were beaten, who were tortured, who were harmed. Some of them survived, some of them died. But all had a terrible experience. And even if they didn't die in the jail or through the actions of the people who had accused them and were torturing them, then they would die later, quite soon after that, because of the, life-limiting injuries that they had sustained during their time in the jail. To be accused of something without being able to defend yourself, to be accused of something that is so ephemeral that you yourself can't find any way in which to disprove that this is not true. It must be a horrific thing. We are all so used to the wheels of justice, of the science that can prove whether we are guilty or not, the many images that we have. We are constantly photographed, constantly under surveillance. And so, in a way, that can be a good thing if we are accused of something that we haven't done. The people of old didn't have that. If somebody pointed a finger and said, "My cow got sick when you walked past it and it won't give milk anymore and I want reparation," because the church held such strength, because the church held the power over life and death, literally, you had to pay up or you were prosecuted. They would go and have you hanged. They would go and have you harmed. They would go and have your children harmed. Very often, the deal that was made with the women, that if they confessed to being a witch, that their children would be safe. Their children would not be accused. And in some cases that was the case, and in other cases it wasn't. It is a horrific thing to think of the injustices, of the misadventure of trials that were pure theatre to titillate the bored and disenfranchised populace. So it is that, it was a bit like those horror movies we watch in the cinema these days, or the people who sat and watched people being killed by the guillotine. All of that part of humanity that revels in the misfortune of others, all of that was a part that played its role in the prosecution of what we people called witches. And there has been a belief in magical people in all traditions and all cultures since the dawn of time. And there are magical people. But I know for sure, because I remember a past life, and maybe you feel that I'm being a little bit big-headed, but I know a past life, and I know the fear, and I know that life of several other women and men who who had been accused or who were married to somebody that has been accused, because we forget sometimes that the children and the husbands of the wives who had been accused may well still have loved them, may well still have, you know, can you imagine if you really have someone you'd love deeply, your husband, your wife, and suddenly you know that they're in mortal danger, that you will lose them through no fault of their own. It's not an illness that takes them away. It is the malice and the bitchiness and the horrid behavior of the people around you, the people that you once called friends, people you once called neighbors and fellows. So can you imagine what that must have felt like? So my life as a magic keeper that I remember, and I may be deluded, you can make your own mind up about that, is that we knew what was coming. We could read the signs. I mean, come on, we are seers. These days we use cards, then we use stones or sticks or, shells or bones or whatever we had to hand. Not everybody had a fancy set of cards then. But we would know to see the symbols and the signs in the skies. We are druids, we are sky gazers. We would know what if there was an ill wind, if there was a funny smell, and it is a funny smell at times. Often it smells of sulfur or rotten eggs when something bad is coming. We had these heightened senses with which we used in order to protect ourselves. So for us, we saw this coming and we were warning people. I know we warned people. I know we said to people, please don't be so obvious. Please be careful when you help this person. They have been known to be malicious. They have been known to be nasty. They have been known to be vindictive. If you don't do, you know them these days, the people that you're trying to help, and then they come back and they say, well, that didn't work. And we have this as healers, and not very often, but at times, there is a person that you must not go near, that this person, when they're reaching out and saying, can I book an appointment? Can I come and see you? Can I talk to you? Can you heal me? The word is no, because they're too dangerous. They're too dangerous in themselves. They're not with good intent. They may not be aware of it, but it is a danger. And so we knew what was coming. We knew how it was going to be. And this is very similar to these days. We in Avalon, we believe that we are oracles. We believe that we can see the future, that we can sense the future, that we can see things. And so we would have packed our satchels and we would have started leaving. We would have gone somewhere where there were not a lot of people, somewhere out of the villages, into the woods. And very often we talk about the witch at the edge of the wood. We would vanish in plain sight. I very often talk to my students about the fact that, when we as women were foraging the herbs and, the medicines that we needed from nature, we would put our staff, and it would be a two-pronged staff, into the earth, and a sister would walk by and know, oh, Bee's here, she's foraging for mushrooms, let's say mushrooms. And they would walk on. Witches would always make sure that they had their own place where they would do their foraging, because over foraging can actually kill. There was a conversation in our group this week, just by the by, that if you tread on moss once, it will grow stronger. If you tread on it again, it will die off. And that is the same in nature. So we would pack our satchel, we would take what we could carry, our children, our wealth, our clothing on our backs, and we would walk somewhere where we would find fresh water, where we would find our herbs, where we would find roots, where we would find bark, where we would find food, shelter, and very often it was caves, very often it was maybe even burrows in the earth, because you can warm them very nicely. And I know of several settlements in North Wales now where people have created underground villages. You can believe me or not, but I promise you that these people for the last 20 years have prepared for what is coming in the future. And they are seers, and they have seen 20 years ago that we are going to have a civic war here in our country, in this island, in the Isle of Albion, that there will be unrests, there will be, terrible clashes in the big cities. So they've already prepared, and they have created this really interesting, smart ways of living off the land in the most simple way. And I have been told over and over again by Cerridwen for the last 8 months that 2025 has got to be a time. I'm sorry, I'm going to get that out. A time of living simply, of being aware that we have to make do and mend. Most of us have enough clothes in our cupboards that we don't have to buy anything until the day we drop dead, certainly in my case. And we have all these things that we need. And it is possessions that weigh down the life. It's possessions that weigh down the homes, the houses. And I always think it is a really good idea to have, so we have a big van, to have provisions for, let's say, 3 weeks, and know a place where you could go, just leave and go away from the balled up humanity that may well explode into anger and viciousness. And if anybody thinks that I'm talking rubbish, I want to remind you that in the 80s we had the Tot Hill riots where people died, beaten to death. So we're not looking at past tense for centuries ago. We're looking at decades ago, and the situation in this country is becoming very interesting. So knowing where you could go, where you could hide, where you could be safe, is not a bad thing. I've had for years a place in North Wales where I can just drive, and my van always has enough fuel in. So I could make it. I would drive overnight and I would vanish for a while until things settle down. People might come and take my possessions, but they won't take the lives of the ones I love. And that was what the witches in those days knew. They knew that as long as you can carry, and they knew that from their forefathers that were the gatherers and the hunters, that you could carry and take what you can carry and go and be safe. Get the hell out of Dodge, basically. Those healers who had been settled, whose families had been in villages for millennia, centuries at least, they didn't believe that their neighbors could turn against them in the way that they did. They didn't believe that somebody could do things so malicious to pretend that they were in league with the devil, knowing that that would lead straight to your death. How much hatred must you have, and resentment must you have in your heart? How much fear must you have in your heart when you are the one that accuses, points the finger at an innocent person, knowing you're going to cause them their death? It's no different than sticking a knife in somebody's belly and making sure that they bleed out. It is a horrific thing to think about, but it is something human beings are entirely capable of. So we walk, not just to remind people of the people who died, but also we walk for those to remember how quickly the tide can turn, how quickly Glastonbury, who is a free place for all faiths to gather, for all people to gather and to be themselves, how quickly that could change, how quickly that could turn. It is a prediction. I'm not trying to frighten anyone, but the Witches' Memorial Walk reminds us all that safety is not always in numbers, and that who the person is, one day your friend, may well be one day your enemy. When their neck is on the line, everybody will do everything to survive. So be aware, be awake, and listen to your inner voice. Listen to your inner seer.
Come, we are
sisters standing side by side, side by side. Here is the thing, do a thing, we are goddess watching us with pride, us with pride. Through Cerridwen we are kings, let the magic spread far and wide, far and wide.